My name is Grace Hunter. I'm 33 years old. I serve as a Navy SEAL commander for the United States military. That sentence still sounds surreal when I say it out loud. Not because I'm unqualified, but because for most of my life nobody thought I'd amount to much of anything at all. Not even my own family, especially not my sister. Her name is Madison. Colonel Madison Hunter now. She was the golden child, the voice at the dinner table, the name on everyone's lips. I was the shadow, the background, the girl who didn't get invited. I wasn't on the list. Not 3 months ago. Not even last week. And certainly not tonight at her promotion ceremony at the Pentagon, where they were celebrating her rise to full colonel. It was supposed to be her moment, her stage. And yet, here I am, standing in the doorway of a room lined with medals, generals, and dignitaries. I hadn't planned on walking in so early. But when the officer at the entrance checked the revised list and nodded, "You're cleared." Captain Hunter, something in me straightened. I took a breath, smoothed my uniform, then walked in, eyes turned. Conversations stopped. Forks clinked back onto china. There was a strange kind of hush, like the quiet that happens just before a wave breaks. I spotted my sister across the ballroom. Her back was turned, laughing with an aide. She didn't see me. My parents were beside her, all smiles. Then I heard Madison's voice, low and sharp. "Who's she?" she whispered, frowning toward the commotion. Before anyone could answer, the main stage lit up. A man stepped forward, 4 stars on each shoulder, commanding the silence with nothing more than his presence. He smiled. Then he said clearly and firmly, "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise as we welcome Captain Grace Hunter, youngest SEAL commander in U.S. naval history, and tonight's highest honor." The room stood up. Chairs scraped backward. Uniforms straightened. People applauded like they suddenly remembered their hands. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just walked. Each step felt like a decade. Each clap sounded like a memory. I saw my sister's face drain of color. I saw my father's jaw tighten. My mother's hand floated to her chest. They couldn't breathe. Not because I had arrived, but because I had arrived like this, with medals on my chest, with purpose in my stride, with my name in lights on a list they never put me on. I kept walking until I reached the foot of the stage. I saluted. The general saluted back. Then he pinned the medal above my heart and leaned in just slightly. "They'll write this one down," he whispered. And that's when I finally allowed myself to feel something. Not revenge, not pride, but release. Because I wasn't supposed to be here, not in this room, not in this uniform, not in this life. And yet I was. If you're wondering how I ended up on that stage, how I went from being erased to being recognized, from forgotten to unforgettable, you need to know the whole story. Not the part they printed in press releases or award memos, but the real part, the invisible part, the part no one saw coming. You see, revenge doesn't always look like fury. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it wears dress whites and walks across marble floors, while the ones who tried to bury it forget how to breathe. This is the story of how I got there, and it starts long before anyone clapped. It starts the day I stopped chasing their approval and started building something they couldn't tear down. Her name was Madison Hunter. Even when we were little, people used to say she had that officer presence. She knew how to enter a room, how to tilt her chin just right, how to command attention without even raising her voice. By the time she was 16, she was winning leadership awards. By 18, she had already secured her appointment to West Point. And when she graduated top 10 in her class, my parents framed the newspaper clipping like it was scripture. Madison never came home without a plan. She always had an itinerary, a dress code, and a talking point. She knew when to speak, when to smile, and when to hold silence like a loaded weapon. She was born to impress. And my family treated her like she was carved from legacy itself. After graduation, she was fast-tracked into administrative leadership. Within 6 years, she became one of the youngest operations officers ever assigned to the Pentagon's Strategic Coordination Division. That's a long way of saying she was the one behind the curtain, pulling strings, organizing initiatives, smoothing political tension between departments. She didn't fight on the battlefield. She won wars in boardrooms. She married a decorated Air Force Colonel, Thomas Keane. He was charming in the way political men are. Clean suits, confident handshakes, a name that showed up in the society pages just often enough to feel important. Together, they were the power couple military circles whispered about. Sharp, untouchable, photogenic. Every holiday our parents would talk about the fundraisers Madison helped organize, or the awards dinners she attended, or how she once gave a speech at an international security forum and received a standing ovation. Her photo in full dress uniform with perfect posture and that smile sat dead center on our mantel at home. Meanwhile, mine stayed in a drawer. At the dinner table, my mother would serve plates and say, "You should ask your sister how she does it. So composed, so polished. That's how a woman succeeds in this world." And I remember thinking even back then that success must have a narrow definition if it didn't include me. I didn't hate Madison. I envied her clarity, her way of walking into a room like it owed her a favor, her ease. She made everything look effortless. But I also knew the cost of perfection. Madison didn't bend. She didn't pause. She didn't ask questions she couldn't control the answers to. Her life was a press release, clean, trimmed, optimized for applause. I was the opposite, messy, quiet, hard to categorize. I asked questions people didn't like to answer. I lingered in shadows, not because I was afraid, but because I saw more from the edges. In our house, being different was dangerous, not in the physical sense, but emotionally, spiritually. You could feel it in the way my mother's voice would tighten when I came home covered in mud after training, or how my father would sigh when I showed up in fatigues instead of a blouse and skirt. "Girls shouldn't take risks," my mother once said over tea. "You should learn to live like your sister." I didn't answer, but I remember gripping the cup so tightly the porcelain edge left a dent in my palm. It's not that I wanted to be Madison. I just wanted to be seen without needing to become her. But in my family, visibility required symmetry. To be accepted, you had to fit the shape they recognized. Madison fit. She completed the picture, the story they told about themselves. I was the detail that didn't match the frame. Still, I stayed close. For years, I tried to exist quietly beside her brilliance. I attended the dinners when invited. I smiled in photos when asked. I kept my voice soft, my opinions tempered. But no matter what I did, I was always the afterthought. Always the one who needed adjusting, smoothing, redefining. I was the girl you sent to military school so she'd toughen up. Madison was the one you sent to Washington so she could shine. And shine she did. By the time she turned 35, she was sitting in on defense briefings with Joint Chiefs. She had her own assistant, her own press contacts, her own seat at every table that mattered. People looked at her and saw excellence. They looked at me and saw potential. It's funny, really. When people say families are built on love, I nod and say nothing. Because I know some families are built on comparison, and in mine, comparison was sacred. I didn't tell anyone I enlisted. Not my parents, not my sister, not even my college roommate who used to joke that I'd end up working in a bookstore or a remote lighthouse. I walked into the recruiter's office on a rainy Thursday morning, signed the paperwork, and never looked back. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even pride. It was quiet, clean, private resolve. A decision made not to shock anyone, but to save myself. I needed to be somewhere my worth didn't depend on my posture or my polish. I wanted a place where results mattered more than appearances, so I chose the Navy. The first time I failed Bud-S, I was 23. I fractured 2 ribs during underwater knot tying and refused to quit. They pulled me out anyway, said I could reattempt after recovery. I didn't go home. I stayed nearby, working nights at a gas station and swimming in the ocean every morning before the sun came up. The second time, I made it past Hell Week, only to get dropped for a respiratory infection. I remember lying on the floor of the barracks, coughing until blood hit the tile. They said I could take a desk job instead. I said no. The third time I passed. Barely. And when I did, when they handed me that pin, I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just wrote one sentence in the back of my notebook using ocean ink. I don't need to be accepted. I just need to do what's right. That notebook lived in the lid of my rucksack from that day forward. Every mission, every march, every long night, those words reminded me why I stayed. When the call came that I had been assigned to SEAL Team Bravo 12, I sat on my cot and waited for the feeling to sink in. It never came the way I expected. There was no triumph, no cinematic moment, just a quiet exhale. I told myself that maybe greatness didn't always feel loud. I deployed within 3 weeks, Our first mission was surveillance, low risk, high temperature. My boots melted against the sand. I didn't speak unless spoken to. My team leader, Chief Dawson, called me Ghost because I could blend into terrain and silence without a trace. In the field, I found something I'd never known at home: recognition without applause. They didn't care who my sister was. They didn't ask if I wore makeup or knew which fork to use. They only cared whether I covered their six and made smart calls when it mattered. And I did. I started journaling between deployments. Nothing dramatic, just small entries: fog on the lens, the sound of gunfire from 2 valleys over the names of people I couldn't save. Once in northern Afghanistan, we were pinned down for 8 hours inside a crumbling farmhouse. Mortars hit within 10 feet of our position. I held the hand of a 19-year-old corpsman named Franco as he bled out beside me. He was 2 months into his first tour. That was the first time I saw death up close. And strangely, it didn't hollow me, it sharpened me. It made every breath feel earned. After that, I started sleeping with my boots on. I kept a folded flag under my cot, not out of fear, but reverence. I never wanted to forget how quickly everything could end. Back home, I heard nothing. No letters, no congratulations, no, "We're proud of you." My sister gave a keynote speech at a NATO leadership summit. My mother sent me the clip with a note that said, "Your sister is doing great things." I watched the video. Madison stood beneath an international SEAL, speaking fluently about alliance strategy and cooperative frameworks. The audience gave her a standing ovation. I turned off the screen and went back to writing recon reports. It wasn't that I wanted applause. I just wanted to matter somewhere. And for the first time in my life, I did. Not in a headline, not on a family mantle, but in the eyes of a teammate whose life depended on mine. They didn't celebrate me with champagne. They nodded, handed me a ration bar, and said, "Nice work, Ghost." And in that moment, I felt more seen than I ever had in a room full of family. 3 years ago, I received the kind of assignment most SEALs train their entire careers for. It was Syria, classified, high value. My team was selected for precision intel recovery. No direct engagement, no theatrics, just clean execution. I had trained for months to get into that room. Briefed, studied terrain, memorized aerial maps until they showed up in my dreams. When the final order came down, my name was typed in bold, Commander in Field, G. Hunter. We were scheduled to move at 0400 the next morning. I didn't sleep. I ran final checks, synchronized watches, went over fail-safes. It was one of those nights where your pulse runs like electricity, not fear, just clarity. Everyone knew what was at stake. No one needed to say it out loud. And then at 11:37 p.m., a knock. A corporal stood at my tent flap with sealed orders. "Ma'am, commands requesting your immediate presence." I thought it was another intel update. Maybe a change in wind direction, satellite pass, delay, minor protocol adjustment. I zipped my jacket, walked across the gravel, boots crunching against the silence. Inside the ops tent, 3 officers were waiting. Their expressions weren't tense. They were unreadable. One handed me a file. Effective immediately. Commander Hunter is to be removed from Operation Iron Wave. Flagged for internal review. Risk potential information breach. I thought I misread it. I scanned the words again. Then again. My throat went dry. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "What does this mean?" The lead officer didn't meet my eyes. "It's not disciplinary. It's precautionary, based on what A pause. Too long, too careful. Red level routing concern. Clearance conflict." That was military speak for someone upstairs said, "You're a problem, but we're not going to explain why." I opened my mouth to protest. But what do you say to a decision that's already been coded in red? I've passed every clearance review. I've led 3 successful ops in the last 6 months. There's no breach. There's no conflict. Again, no eye contact. Just a signature page. They had already signed it. Effective immediately. They reassigned leadership to Lieutenant Carlson. A good man, capable, but not ready. That wasn't ego talking. It was experience. He had never led a mission of this scale. He didn't know the terrain the way I did. Didn't know the subtle shifts in local movement, the unspoken patterns I'd spent weeks observing. I walked out of the tent in silence. The stars above me felt fake. When I got back to my cot, my gear was already packed. Someone had folded my name tape and placed it on top of the duffel bag. Neat, precise. like I had never belonged there in the first place. I sat down. I didn't cry. But my hands shook for 23 minutes straight. I counted. No explanation, no warning, no hearing. Just an administrative kill switch, flipped by someone with more stars on their collar. The next morning, I watched from the edge of base as my team boarded the chopper without me. Carlson gave me a nod. I nodded back. Nobody said a word. Later that week, I was flown back to Ramstein under temporary reassignment pending review. That phrase stuck in my head like a thorn. They wouldn't tell me who filed the red flag request. Only that it originated from Central Strategic Command, which could mean any number of desks. But I knew one in particular that had that level of access. One that had a direct link to Pentagon routing codes. One where the name Madison Hunter was printed outside the door in brushed steel letters. Still, I didn't want to believe it. Not yet. I told myself maybe it was an error, a misrouted form, some glitch in the system. But deep down, something colder was already forming. A seed of knowing. Not just that I had been removed, but that someone wanted me removed. Not for failure, but because I was succeeding. 3 days after I was pulled from the Syria op, I found myself standing in a corridor 12 floors beneath the Pentagon. A place of perfect lighting and polite conversations where real decisions got buried in acronyms and chain of command dead ends. I had spent the last 72 hours asking questions, quietly, carefully. Most people gave me the same look, sympathetic but non-committal, like they knew something but had been told not to say. But one junior officer slipped. He said the request had come from Strategic Operations Review. That meant one name, one desk. I walked the hall without a word badge, clipped face still. When I reached her door, the placard was exactly as I remembered. Lieutenant Colonel Madison Hunter, Office of Strategic Operations. I knocked. Come in, came the voice. She was seated behind a glass desk posture, perfect coffee steaming beside an open file. When she looked up, there wasn't even a flicker of surprise, just a soft smile. "Grace," she said warmly. "I heard you were on site. Everything okay?" I didn't answer. I just placed the red flag removal order on her desk and tapped the bottom line, authorized by Lieutenant Colonel Madison Hunter. She glanced down, then up. Her expression didn't change. "Oh," she said softly. "That." "Yes, that," I repeated. "You signed it." She sighed and folded her hands over the file. "It's not personal, just protocol." The review flagged some inconsistencies in clearance routing. "Your name came up. I was in the room. They asked me to verify." "You didn't verify," I said flatly. "You authorized." She tilted her head slightly, the way she always did when she was preparing a diplomatic response. "Grace, this kind of thing happens more than you realize. It's temporary, a procedural hiccup. It'll clear in no time. But you knew I was leading the mission." "Yes," she said. "And you've done good work. Then why pull me?" There was a pause, a heartbeat too long. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, walked to the window and looked out. It was ceremonial, like everything she did. When two people from the same family start appearing in too many reports, she said carefully, optics get tricky. Some in leadership expressed concerns about consolidation of name recognition. "Name recognition," I repeated. "You mean having two hunters in active command?" She didn't look at me, just stared at the skyline, like it held the answers she needed. "It's not about ego, Grace. It's about clarity, presentation, public perception." I laughed once, short and sharp. I didn't realize the battlefield cared about press kits. Now she looked at me, not angry, not even defensive, just calm. "You've worked hard." No one's denying that. But sometimes timing matters. Visibility matters. We can't always control how the narrative forms. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't about security or protocol or some unseen threat. It was about branding. And I was a redundancy she didn't want on the books. I left without another word. Back at base, my new orders arrived, reassigned to Naval Training Command. Female Candidate Development, San Diego. It was a polite way of saying sit down, stay out of the way. They didn't strip my rank, just my role, just my purpose. For weeks I taught room-clearing exercises to teenagers who thought a rifle was just a video game prop. I signed off on obstacle course evaluations and gave pep talks to recruits with perfect ponytails. They had no idea who I was. And maybe that was the point. Each day I folded into a life that had no edge, no fight, just spreadsheets and training drills and a smile that never quite reached my eyes. At night, I'd stare at my rucksack, the one with my name, my record, my legacy inside, and wonder how quickly someone else could make all of it disappear. Apparently, all it took was a signature from someone who once braided my hair before the first day of school. San Diego looked nothing like the places I'd been deployed. There was sun, too much sun, sand that didn't burn, civilians jogging past the gates like they had nothing to fear. I remember thinking the first morning I woke up there that the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like absence. Naval Training Command, Female Candidate Development Division. That was the title on my new assignment file. Sounds official, purposeful. But we all knew what it was, the corner of the military where careers went to soften. They gave me a whistle, a clipboard, a room in a converted barracks with peeling paint and a broken lock. I didn't unpack. My job was to train female recruits, most of them college dropouts, legacy kids who didn't make it through officer candidate school, or high-energy civilians who had no idea what they'd signed up for. They called me ma'am or Miss Hunter. I told them to stop doing both. You can call me Grace, I said, or Commander, whichever one helps you move faster. Every morning started the same. Rain or not, I walked them to the obstacle course at 0500. Some cried the first week. Others broke down during underwater confidence drills. I kept my tone even. I didn't yell. I didn't inspire. I just showed up. I taught them how to clear a room with no ammo and low visibility. I taught them how to control breathing under water pressure. I taught them how to read terrain with their hands, not their eyes. Most of them failed, not because they weren't strong, but because no one had ever told them they could be. This was the place for the almosts, the too emotional, the too soft, the girls who had tried to fit somewhere else and gotten rejected. And I was just one of them now, a more decorated version of their story. They didn't know who I used to be. I never told them. But sometimes when they thought I wasn't listening, I'd hear one whisper. She doesn't blink when the flashbangs go off. Or I think she's seen real stuff. They were right, but I didn't need them to know. What I needed was to not forget. So I wrote. Every night. Same notebook. Same ocean ink pen. I wrote about the old ops. About the mission I never got to lead. About Franco and Dawson and the dirt walls of the farmhouse that still showed up in my sleep. I taped the Syria mission file inside the lid of my locker. Not the official version. My version. The maps I'd drawn by hand. The entry and exit points. The satellite timing I'd memorized like scripture. That locker became my anchor. I'd open it every morning, press my palm against the metal, and remind myself, this is not the end. It didn't matter that I wasn't in the field. It didn't matter that the uniform felt heavier here than it ever did under fire. What mattered was that I remembered who I was when no one else did. Sometimes late at night I'd walk the track alone. No lights, no watch. Just boots and memory. I'd hear my old team's voices in the wind. Ghosts, not dead, just far. They were still out there fighting, serving, bleeding for something that once made sense. And I was here, teaching 19-year-olds how to carry a pack without tipping over. The bitterness came in waves, quiet ones. But I never let it show. Because if they had taken my command, they weren't going to take my composure too. So I stood straight, counted cadence, graded drills, and when I saw sparks, tiny flashes of potential in the recruits who refused to quit, I pushed them harder. Not out of cruelty, but out of belief. Because if there was any meaning left in the uniform I wore, it was in what I passed on. Not rank, not medals, but resilience. It began with an email. No subject line, no signature, just a single sentence in the body. I still have the Helmand op data. You want it. The sender's name was Staff Sergeant Eli Reyes. We'd served together once during a winter rotation in eastern Afghanistan. He was quiet but sharp. One of the few who didn't care about small talk, who watched more than he spoke. The kind of soldier you notice not because he tries to lead, but because everyone follows him anyway. I hadn't heard from him in almost 2 years. I sat staring at the screen for a full minute, my hand hovering over the keyboard. I didn't know what he knew. I didn't know why he had the data. But I knew this: if someone outside my chain of command had kept a copy of a classified mission record, it wasn't by accident. It was insurance. I typed back 2 words: send it. That night, a secure file transfer arrived in my inbox. Encrypted, time-stamped, 4 folders. One labeled recon brief. One labeled satellite timing. One with audio recordings from the comms channel. And one labeled simply command notes. I closed my door, unplugged the Ethernet cable, and started reading. It was all there, my original reports from the Hellman mission. The one where we'd extracted 9 hostages without firing a shot. The one I'd led while under hostile surveillance. The one they never wrote about, never acknowledged, never promoted. Inside the command notes, I found something else. A secondary routing memo from the same month. A request for command rotation. It had my name. It had Madison's clearance number. And it had a line I'd never seen before. Consolidate visibility. Maintain clarity of hunter narrative. My stomach dropped. I read it again. Not strategy, not security, narrative. That word confirmed everything I'd tried to push aside. This hadn't been about mistakes, or risk, or qualification. It had been about control. About who got to be visible. About who didn't. I started digging deeper. Every night after drills, after evaluations, after the recruits went to sleep, I returned to my room and traced digital trails. I pulled every piece of paperwork I could legally request. Operation logs, clearance indexes, internal memos. I submitted FOIA requests where I had gaps. I contacted 2 other teammates from my recon days, both now working intelligence support. They didn't say much, but they sent enough. It became an obsession. Not to expose Madison, but to reclaim myself. I kept a corkboard above my desk with strings running between names and dates. Lines connecting mission code, changes, file authors, timestamps that didn't match. One night around 0200, I found it, a discrepancy. On the Syria mission Iron Wave, the clearance report that flagged me had 2 conflicting timestamps, one from 2330, one from 2212. The earlier one, issued before the official red flag, had a different source address. I ran it through a tracking tool. The IP matched an office in D.C., the same building where Madison worked. I stared at the screen for a long time. This was no longer suspicion. It was fact. She had submitted an unofficial request before the formal one ever existed. She'd known I was leading that mission. She'd moved to stop it before any threat, before any error, before any reason. Because I had her name. And I was using it well. The next morning, I printed everything, a full dossier. I added my Hellman reports. I added the satellite logs. I included a transcript of our mission debrief. I bound it all together and wrote 1 sentence on the cover page: silence is not submission. Then I sent it to NCIS. No commentary, no accusation. Just the truth, organized and undeniable. I didn't expect a response. That's the thing about fighting shadows: you rarely know if anyone will notice. But I wasn't doing it to be noticed. I was doing it to stop feeling erased. That night I walked the track again. No moon. Just the distant hum of the barracks power generators. My boots pressed against the gravel like they were remembering something. In my mind I could still hear Madison's voice. It's not personal, it's just protocol. But now I knew better, and knowledge even in silence is power. I stood at the far corner of the field, where the wind always caught hardest, pulled the Syria map from my jacket, and stared at the hand-drawn lines one more time. Each arrow, each marker, each plan that had never been executed. This was mine, this was real, and no amount of buried paperwork could take it from me anymore. If they wanted to forget what I'd done, fine. But I wasn't going to help them do it. When NCIS acknowledged receipt of my report, they didn't respond with congratulations. There was no apology, no retraction. Just a notification that my record had been reviewed and that my operational clearance had been reinstated pending reassignment. It wasn't vindication, it was temporary status, a probationary return, but it was enough. I reported to a desk officer at Joint Task Force Command. They gave me a list of open assignments. Most were low-tier: logistics, observation, risk assessments. I scanned the list once, then stopped at the final entry: Gulf of Oman. Oil tanker hostage situation. Command vacant after 3 prior refusals. I looked at the officer. I'll take that one. He blinked. You sure the last 2 declined for safety issues? That crew's been stuck for over 40 hours. I'm sure. The flight was quiet. The air cold and clinical. 4 hours in, I took out my notebook and wrote a single line across the top, no names. Just responsibilities. I reviewed the brief: 1 commercial oil tanker, 6 civilian crew members, hijacked near the Hormuz Strait. Pirates were well-armed, unverified in number. Satellite feed showed no demands, just radio silence. When I landed, my gear was already waiting: tactical vest, comms, an M4. I hadn't held in over a year. I took inventory, checked calibration, then turned to the strike team briefing. We'd have 4: Sergeant Devers, infantry specialist with counter-piracy background; Corpsman Yates, field medic who'd done 3 tours in Kabul; Petty Officer Lynn, a drone tech with unmatched aerial mapping skills; and me. No one asked why I was leading. No one looked twice at the name. The mission window was tight. A 2-hour approach under cover of night using an unmanned raft to reach the tanker's stern. Entry through the lower cargo hold. Identify hostage locations. Neutralize threats. Exfiltrate same route. At Aero 200 we launched. The raft made no noise, just the sound of wind against plastic seams. The tanker loomed ahead like a silent fortress, black against black water. We clipped in, ascended the ladder, and made entry. Inside, it was colder than expected. Metal and diesel and salt. We split into 2 teams. Lynn monitored infrared from a portable drone. Yates and I took the lower corridor. Devers took the top deck. First contact was fast. 2 pirates near the bridge, armed, alert. Lynn disabled lights using signal disruptors. I advanced with Yates. One went down with a trank. The other ran straight into Devers. Within 15 minutes, we located the crew. Bound, dehydrated but alive. No casualties. Extraction was slow but steady. No gunfire, no casualties. Just hand signals, coordination, and quiet resolve. By 0500 we were out. No medals were given that morning, no press photos, no salutes. When we returned to base, I submitted a 1-page report to the Office of Command. It read, target location secure, 6 hostages retrieved, 0 casualties, all personnel returned. Underneath I added one more sentence: everyone came home. Then I signed Captain Grace Hunter. 2 days later, Command sent word. My status was no longer provisional. It was permanent. I folded the message, slipped it into my journal, and turned the page. Because there was more work to do. And I wasn't done writing yet. They didn't throw a parade. They didn't even shake my hand. But I didn't need applause. I needed the truth to live somewhere besides my chest. And it finally did. 3 weeks after Omen, I received an internal memo brief. Bureaucratic. My record had been corrected. Every notation regarding the Syria incident had been removed. Not sealed, not archived, erased. It no longer existed, not in any database, not on any terminal, not in any officer's file. But I remembered it. Every word, every slight. I read the memo 3 times. Then I closed my laptop, sat in silence, and let the cold air from the barracks window fill my lungs. It wasn't vindication, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. A silent admission that they'd gotten it wrong. The next week, something else arrived. An envelope, unmarked. Inside was a single-page document, a nomination for promotion. Not typed by Command. Not endorsed by Brass. Handwritten by Sergeant Devers, Corpsman Yates, and Petty Officer Lynn. They had filed it together. Under the section, Reason for Recommendation, someone had scribbled in block letters: she led when others fled. She delivered when others debated. She brought us home. Below were 3 signatures. No stamps, no political cushioning. Just truth from the field. I held the paper in both hands like it was made of glass. Then I folded it, placed it in my journal next to the Omen report, and said nothing. Because I had learned the value of silence. That month I was called into a modest room. No stage, no cameras. Just a few chairs, a metal table, and a general I hadn't met before. He didn't say much. Just read a few citations, asked me to stand, and placed a medal in my palm, not on my chest. As if he understood I preferred to carry it, not wear it. It was the Silver Star, one of the military's highest honors for valor in combat. He said, "This is for leadership under impossible odds. I nodded. Thank you, sir. Then I left. No photos were taken, no announcements were made. But my name had begun to circulate in whispers, in debriefs, in the invisible spaces between operations where reputation is born. Not from words, but from consequences. I was no longer Hunter probationary. I was Captain Grace Hunter, and not because I demanded it, but because I had proved it. At the mess hall that night, no one clapped. But a private passed me an extra tray. A tech sergeant offered his last protein bar. And the base cook, who hadn't said a word to me in 4 months, nodded once when I walked past. It was enough. Recognition in my world didn't come in speeches. It came in shared rations, in teammates willing to sign your name beside theirs, in risk offered freely when you asked them to follow. The honor wasn't the medal, it was the quiet trust that I would be called again, and that they would come. The invitation never came, not from her, not from my parents, not from anyone in our family, but the directive did. It arrived through official channels straight from the Office of Joint Operations. A formal request I was to appear as an honored guest at the upcoming ceremony scheduled at Arlington. No further details, no room for questions. The date, June 14th, Flag Day. The same day my sister Madison Hunter was scheduled to receive her promotion to full colonel. I stared at the notice, reread the seal, then placed it next to the other envelope on my desk, this one marked with a golden eagle and a formal RSVP card for a different event. My own. That same afternoon, I was to be formally inducted as the youngest SEAL team commander in U.S. history. 2 ceremonies, 1 day, no overlap, except the air we would breathe. I made my choice. I woke up at 0400. There was no sleep the night before, just movement, steam from the iron, polishing boots in silence, checking every stitch on the uniform I hadn't worn in 3 years, not since I had folded it up in anger and shame and tucked it deep in the back of my locker. Today I pulled it out, pressed every line, replaced every pin, and for the first time in over 1,000 days, I fastened my nameplate, Hunter. No rank, no title, just the name I refused to let them steal. By 0600, I was standing in front of the mirror. The uniform hugged close, structured, resolute. I brushed the last speck of lint off my shoulder, adjusted the cuffs, and stared hard. Not at the scars, at the steadiness. The woman staring back was no longer waiting to be acknowledged. She had written her own orders, fought her own silence, and survived her own erasure. Now she would walk into the same room as the one who signed it. The venue was a stone hall, sunlit and rigid. Red, white, blue bunting framed the stage. Rows of silver chairs lined the room, each tagged with the names of senior officials, family members, and civilian guests. My name wasn't on any seat, but a junior officer approached me near the entrance and handed me a printed slip. You'll be seated in the front. 2nd row, to the right of the flag. He didn't meet my eyes. He didn't need to. Everyone in the building had already seen the morning dispatch, the one that began circulating just hours earlier. Captain Grace Hunter named youngest SEAL commander in naval history. I could feel the shift, the sudden weight in the air, the quiet calculations behind every turned neck. And then I saw her, Madison. She stood near the podium speaking with a cluster of high-ranking officers, smiling that polished, immovable smile. Hair in a tight bun, ribboned sash over her left shoulder, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly. She hadn't changed. Or maybe she had. Maybe the only thing that changed was how I saw her now. She glanced over and froze. A flicker, not fear, not recognition, just calculation. As if she were assessing a variable she hadn't accounted for, as if I wasn't part of the script. She didn't nod, didn't wave. Instead, she leaned to whisper something to her aide. Then she turned back to the group, resumed her composure, and continued as if nothing had happened. I walked slowly to my seat, heels firm against the tile floor, each step deliberate. 2nd row, right of the flag. No one dared block my path. The ceremony began with the national anthem. Everyone stood. I stood straighter. Then came the opening remarks from a general I had only met once before. His voice was even, but I noticed a slight change in tone as he shifted from honoring our exemplary officers to listing those in attendance. And today he said, glancing at his notes, were joined by Captain Grace Hunter, the Navy's youngest SEAL team commander, awarded the Silver Star for distinguished service in maritime hostage operations. Silence. Then applause. Not thunderous, but real, and unmistakably directed at me. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I simply nodded once. Across the aisle, Madison's smile faltered. Just slightly, but I saw it. And I knew she saw me, not as her sister, but as the version of me she had tried to erase. When the aide called my name, I stood. The room stood with me. It wasn't a standing ovation, at least not in the traditional sense. No whistles, no cheers, just chairs pushed back in unison, boots shifting, metals brushing against uniforms, hundreds of bodies rising at once out of instinct or protocol or something else, maybe acknowledgement, maybe reckoning. Madison turned. Her eyes widened, not in joy but confusion, like she was seeing someone she hadn't calculated into the equation, like she had forgotten that shadows too can walk back into the light. She whispered something to the officer beside her. I saw the twitch in her cheek, the tight grip on her commendation folder. Her posture didn't falter, but her mask cracked. Just enough for me to see behind it. Just enough for her to know. I saw. The general walked to the podium. He didn't clear his throat, didn't wait for silence. He simply began. We gather today not only to honor achievement, but to remember integrity. We often applaud titles. We often reward timing. But sometimes, rarely, we bear witness to something else. He paused. The room leaned in. Action. He scanned the crowd, then continued. Action when no one is watching, when no one believes you, when every door is closed and every name has been struck off the record, yet you choose to show up anyway. That is leadership. My throat tightened, but I kept my eyes forward. This individual did not wait for recognition, he said. She did not ask for applause. She did not request to be added back to the list. She wrote her name in sacrifice. She carved her honor into steel. He stepped aside. Captain Grace Hunter, front and center. My legs moved before I could think. Each step echoed through the chamber. I didn't look left, didn't look right, but I felt their eyes. Not just curious, not just surprised. Changed. When I reached the center, the general extended his hand but didn't let go after the shake. He leaned closer to the mic. Welcome, Captain Grace Hunter, he said. Youngest SEAL commander in our Navy's history. Today this room stands not because you were invited, but because you refused to stay silent. The room remained standing. The claps that followed weren't loud, but they were heavy. They came from fists that had held rifles, from palms that had bandaged wounds, from officers who had once passed me in corridors without a glance. Now they saw. Now they remembered. Madison did not clap. She stood motionless, hands tight at her sides. Her lips moved barely. Who's she? But no one answered. Because the question had already been answered. The general turned to me. Would you like to say a few words, Captain? I took the microphone. Held it without trembling. My voice didn't shake. I am Grace Hunter, I said. I don't stand here today because anyone cleared my name. I stand because I never gave it up. Silence. I scanned the faces not for validation, but for memory. I wanted them to remember. I wanted them to know what it meant to lose everything and still walk back in uninvited. 3 years ago, my record was sealed, I continued. But my conscience stayed open. I trained in the shadows, led in silence, served without applause. A pause. And then I added quieter, I returned not to be welcomed, but to remind this room honor isn't assigned. It's proven. Then I stepped back. No tears, no bow, just air finally free to breathe. And behind me the room did not sit back down. The crowd had thinned. Most had moved to the adjoining reception hall, where medals were pinned and wine glasses clinked. I stood near the exit, hands folded behind my back, still in full dress uniform. The ribbon rested against my chest like a weight I hadn't yet grown used to. Then I saw her, Madison. She approached slowly, not with her usual stride, but with hesitation. Her lipstick had faded. Her eyes were red. Her voice came small. You didn't tell me you were coming. I didn't answer right away. I let the air sit between us. Then you never asked. She blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. I watched her search for footing in a conversation she never imagined she'd have to face. You looked different up there, she said finally. I didn't recognize you at first. I wore the same name, I replied, just not the same silence. She glanced away. Her fingers clutched her clutch purse like a lifeline. Her shoulders had dropped. Gone was the confident officer who gave keynote speeches, who stood beside colonels and smiled for cameras. In front of me was someone smaller, unsure, maybe even sorry. Grace. I didn't mean for things to go the way they did. I gave a small nod. I know, I said. That was the problem. She flinched, not visibly, but I felt it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't need to. She did that to herself just by remembering. I thought it was best she continued, her voice cracking, for the family, for our name. The situation, it looked unstable. You were going into hostile territory. If anything had gone wrong, I stopped her with a glance. I went anyway, I said. And nothing went wrong. Except the file you signed. Silence. The kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness. Just truth. She stepped back as if realizing how little ground she had left to stand on. Then our mother approached. She moved with care, aged more than I remembered. Her hands reached for mine. I didn't pull away, but I didn't grip back either. She held them anyway. Gracie, she said softly. You were always the brave one. I didn't know how to support that. I met her eyes. You didn't have to support it, I said. You just had to see it. She nodded slowly, squeezing my fingers. Her lips trembled like she wanted to say more, but there was nothing left to explain. Not after 3 years of silence and one room finally standing. Then my father. He stood behind them, stiff in his Sunday coat. For a moment I thought he'd turn away again, but he didn't. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. I was wrong, he said. That was it. No defense, no justification, just words. I waited. He lowered his eyes. I should have believed you, he said. Not the papers, not the silence. You deserved more. I nodded once. I didn't need to be believed, I replied. I needed to be seen. The weight of those words didn't fall on him. They fell on all of us. On every dinner table where my name hadn't been spoken. On every ceremony I'd watched from afar. On every birthday card that never came. Madison wiped at her cheek. My mother let go of my hand. My father stepped aside. And I turned. Not out of bitterness, but clarity. I had returned not to reclaim a place in their lives, but to reclaim myself. I stepped out of the ceremony hall. The sun was setting low and golden, casting a long shadow behind me. The medal on my left shoulder caught the light just enough to remind me it was real. Not a gesture, not a favor, but something earned. The sound of applause still echoed faintly from inside. But I wasn't listening anymore. I walked slowly across the stone path, letting the quiet wrap around me like a familiar coat. Every step felt like leaving behind not a chapter, but an entire volume. That's when I heard the voice behind me. Captain Hunter, ma'am, wait, I turned. A young officer, no more than 23, rushed up, still adjusting the cuffs of her uniform. Her breath came fast, her posture rigid. But her eyes. Hopeful. Sorry, she said, catching her breath. I had to ask. Do you think someone like me could ever be part of SEAL? Her question stopped me cold. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I remembered being her. All those years ago on a recruitment day no one cared I showed up to. Wearing boots 2 sizes too big. Carrying questions no one answered. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out something small. A weathered insignia, seal pin edges dulled from time, metal warm from being carried too long. I pressed it into her hand. You don't need to be right for SEAL, I told her gently. You need to be ready to keep going long after the world tells you to stop. She blinked, nodded, then saluted. I returned it, and watched her disappear back into the hallway I'd just left behind. I didn't go to the reception. I didn't wait for another photograph or a second handshake. Instead, I walked toward the edge of the training grounds. The old helipad was quiet. Grass pushed through the cracks now. The wind carried the scent of oil and eucalyptus. I sat down on a worn bench, one I used to rest on after late-night drills. And I thought of everything, of that first rejection, of Madison's signature on the transfer report, of every cold dinner table and unopened letter. But more than that, I thought of the silence I had once accepted. The years I waited to be seen, to be chosen, to be called forward. Until one day I stopped waiting. I stopped needing a room at their table and started building my own. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes when you stop trying to fit, when you realize the problem was never that you were too much, too loud, too different, but that the space you were handed was too small for the woman you were becoming. I carved my place not through noise, but through action. I didn't storm the gates. I didn't scream my worth. I simply stayed. Stayed long enough to outlast the forgetting. Long enough to prove that quiet is not the same as invisible. And now my name is on the list. My photo on the wall. My file cleared. Not because someone opened a door for me, but because I built one from scratch and walked through it myself. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.